Hey everybody, welcome to part 4 of our Evolution of Seed series. I'm Flash McVay. I'm here with Vandal, Mann, and we're going to talk about Operation Iraqi Freedom, the lead up, the aftermath, and just kind of really focusing on that night one of Weaseling on the invasion of Iraq in March 19th of 2003. So as we kind of have done in the past, we had the intro, we had part 1 of Linebacker 1 and 2 in the Vietnam War, really getting into the history of the Weasels. And then part 2, talking to Curly Pence for Desert Storm. Part 3, Blink, Blink, and Stop with Operation Allied Force. And now we're here talking with Vandal about the long and illustrious history of the Weasels and kind of the Weasel spirit and culture. So thanks for supporting the podcast. Subscribe, get the newsletter, all those different things. But with that, Vandal, thanks for joining me, man. Quick intro, how'd you get in the military? Brief, like, overall history of the career, and then we'll jump right in to the good stuff, as
Awesome.
we say.
Hey, by the way, I'm really glad you got to connect with Blink. I know we talked about that last week. He was my DO at WIC, so great guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so how did I get into it? If you ask my mom, she says I was, making airplanes out of her bobby pins before I could talk and things like that, and that's the only thing I'd ever wanted to do, apparently, right? Obviously, she remembers that better than me. So I knew from a very young age that I don't ask me how. This is all pre-Top Gun and all that stuff. I just wanted to fly fighters, and in fact, I was in 6th grade, and I sent a letter applying to the Air Force Academy, and they were like, "Hey, it's a little bit early, but here's some pens and posters, and write us back when you're a junior in high school." And I didn't know much about the academy. I was just like, oh, that's where you go if you want to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force. So I went there. I ended up going there. I was in the post-Desert Storm drawdown, so I did not get a pilot slot out of the academy. So I did a penalty lap, and it was a great penalty lap. I was a maintenance officer at Nellis, center of the universe. Again, what a great place to be as a second lieutenant. And so that's where my association with Nellis and weapons school kind of began, and I saw it from the maintenance side. Got selected for pilot training out of there. Dropped a Viper. Was and we can talk later on. I think I saw in your notes on how I picked what I picked. But so I went to the B course, Kunsan first assignment. Kunsan then follow on to Misawa. Kunsan I was in the Harm Squadron, 80th. And then also went to Misawa, Samurai Wood. That's where I did Northern Watch, Southern Watch, OIF, Shock and Awe. Went to weapons school after that, and then went to Spang. So I stayed in the Weaseling business. Then did kind of school staff, ACSC, did advanced programs at ACC. Did a little side stint with the Navy, flying an irregular warfare one-off airplane for a little bit. And then came back to the Air Force fold, chief of safety at Luke, went back to Kunsan as an OPSO, and then came back as a fighter squadron commander at Luke and retired out of there.
Awesome. So pretty much the Weaseling business your entire career, from Kunsan to on.
Yeah, the majority of my CAF time was spent Weaseling. Yeah,
love that. So yeah, we kind of talk like the as you're kind of going in, like, once you get into the Weasel business, you almost never want to leave. It's such a it's like my experience growing up in the A-10, kind of with the CAS mission. It almost becomes like a part of you and a little bit of an emotional mission. It's something that we've kind of heard from everybody as we go through, and it sounds like that was the same to you. So love that. Right into the academy as a 6th grader. I went as a fellow academy guy. I would have written them a letter to leave a couple times if that would have been my.
They actually wrote me a couple of letters asking me to leave once I got there, but I ended up.
Yeah, I got a couple of those as well.
Yeah.
But love it. Glad you made it. That's kind of the trend of fighter pilots is almost didn't make it.
Yeah.
But all right, so then maintenance officer, then to pilot training. So what drew you to the F-16? Was that your number one choice? Was it
this is an interesting story. I mean, it's worth telling. So I was always the odd man out, because remember, I grew up in the 80s, and every Air Force commercial on MTV or you name it, Thunderbirds, everything had F-16s, right? Because that was the new hotness, right? And I was like, no, don't want to fly it. I want to fly F-15. I want to be an air-to-air guy. And again, I was a history nerd, so I read all about Battle of Britain and Mig Alley and things like that. So I mean, I started reading those books in third, fourth grade. So totally nerded out on that. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to shoot down other airplanes. And all through the academy, one of my best buds, Squawk, who also became a Viper patch, he was like, "Dude, you're nuts, man." I'm even at the academy, he's telling me, I'm going to fly Vipers. I'm like, "No, man, I'm going to fly Eagles." And so at the academy, I went to Ops Air Force. I went to Tyndall, and I got 6 Eagle rides, and I'm like, "This is it. This is what I want to do." And then when I worked maintenance, I ended up working maintenance for first the 422 Vipers, and then eventually the Weapons School Vipers. And when I got picked up for pilot training, the back then the F-16 division of Weapons School, now the 16th, kind of as my farewell presents, the IPs put together a FAM flight for me. So this was an incentive ride. This was a FAM ride, me in the back seat. And dude, it changed my life because up to that point, I had been 100%, I'm going to fly Eagles, I'm going to fly Eagles, I'm going to fly Eagles. And I got one backseat ride in a Viper. And unlike my rides at Tyndall, dude, we were at 300 feet 1 minute. We're at like 40,000 feet the next. We're doing pops. We're doing Maverick attacks. Then we're doing some air to air. And I hadn't done any low level in the Eagle. And we spent a lot of time down low.
As one does.
And oh, by the way, the seat was just, I'm like, this 30-degree recline. I mean, I feel like I'm in my easy chair, everything, just like a glove. And literally, I landed from that sortie and I was like, no, it's got to be Viper. So by the time I got to pilot training, they had you put your preference worksheet in, and I had flopped the 2, and it was Viper number 1. And then, ended up doing pretty well at pilot training. And I took the first Viper in the drop. And all we had available, we didn't have any A-10s. There was one Strike Eagle. And for some reason, that I always went to the number 1 guy at the number 1 base, which I never understood. I'm like, why do you want to fly with 2 people in the jet, man? Didn't you get enough of that in 238? And so I think it was a scarcity fallacy, right? There's only one, so it must be really good.
Yeah.
Which again, nothing against the Strike Eagle Bubbas. I mean, I'm just saying I did not want to fly a crew airplane.
No, we do that. We do that here. We talk shit on Strike Eagle.
Yeah, perfect. So anyway, so my choice was Eagles and Vipers, and my assigned IP was a Desert Storm Eagle vet. Damon Hart, man, great dude. Really, really got along with him. Just a fantastic IP. And he had this Texas drawl. He's like, "Man, you're going to be really fucking up if you don't take an Eagle." And he didn't talk to me for a week after we. And this was back when you didn't get told what you were flying. It's like you had like an NFL draft style thing, VTC, or it wasn't VTC. It was just a comm between the 3 auditoriums of the 3 bases, and they had a vis-a-vis or the projector on the screen that had silhouettes of the various airplanes that are available. And so like the number 1 guy at the number 1 base stood up and said, "I'm going to take this." And they would, at each base, they would take a wet erase pen and freaking X that silhouette out. And so it was like, you went down the line, you got up.
Oh man.
Yeah. So we had about, 4 Eagles in the drop and 7 or 8 Vipers. And so I got up and I took the first Viper of the drop, and like I said, old Captain Harp did not talk to me for a good week after that. He was pissed. I don't know if he was seriously pissed, but he sure came across like I had let him down by taking a Viper over an Eagle. And it was one of those things where after that one Viper ride, I was like, man, I still love air to air, but this raging around low altitude and slinging hate at the ground, I don't want to only do air to air. And I think that is probably what drew me to the Weasel mission as well, because one of the things because I knew even in the B course, I was like, I want to go to a Block 50. Back then, the Block 50s. And one of the reasons was, of the Viper missions out there, the Block 50 units had a more balanced, I guess, mission portfolio, if you will, of they maintained a really high level of air-to-air proficiency while also maintaining the air-to-ground. And so I felt like I got to have the best of the both worlds, in the sense that I didn't want to be exclusively an air-to-air guy, but I didn't also want to be just a bomb dropper, right? And so I felt like the Weasel mission was, again, at my level of understanding, I thought it. And the other thing that also influenced me was I was a maintenance officer at the weapons school when the Viper took over the Weasel mission from the F4G. Because when I was there, the 561st Fighter Squadron was the last Air Force F4 Weasel Squadron. So I was there when they retired, and the Viper picked it up from them. So I mean, all that stuff kind of influenced me to where I ended up, what I think better lucky than good, an incredibly satisfying career. I mean, I can't think of anything I would have changed as far as those kind of choices that I made.
Love that. Yeah, and which is great because talking about the evolution of Seed. I mean, Curly Pence from part two for Desert Storm. He was in the 561st as a F4G guy.
Oh wow, yeah.
As on his last F4 assignment before he went and did air staff for Kosovo, and then ended up in the Strike Eagle to retire as his time once he came back to actually flying. But yeah, so we start to see like it's all connected and everything kind of just works on a kind of a linear scale, which is why seed is seed is seed. And some of the basic concepts that we've all been taught kind of perpetuate all the way through to even today's fight and what we could expect into the future. So
yeah, I certainly think the mentality does. The mentality certainly should.
Oh yeah. So getting into we're going to kind of talk about the lead up to Iraq. Then we'll go back a little bit to your training, like going up into it and kind of Northern Watch, Southern Focus. And then we'll finish up the majority of the discussion with just Weaseling kind of for there. So Iraq, kind of like the thorn in the side of the early to late 90s into the 2000s. It's almost like not to belittle or denigrate anything that's not at all what I mean, but like after 9/11, like going to Afghanistan with the big conflict of 20 years there was always at the forefront of like the president's mind was Iraq and Saddam Hussein. So kind of like that was the big focus. So even in like as we're talking in 98, President Clinton, it always centered around weapons of mass destruction. So President Clinton in 98 signed and Congress authorized the Iraqi Liberation Act, which basically was, hey, we're going to pay and force Saddam to let UN weapons inspectors into the country, looking for these WMDs and looking at their nuclear program and their chemical and biological program. And of course, as he always did, Saddam said absolutely not letting UN inspectors in. So that was now the reason for Operation Desert Fox. So you had Desert Fox bombing campaign over 100 military sites, kind of going into there, and like really the first post 1991 bombing campaign of Iraq, and started our reinvigoration of our presence in the theater. Then 9/11 happens, and now you got President Bush too, which the Hussein and Bush family. You could write a book about. War of the Roses, if you will, with those guys. But Bush numero dos now is going in, and now Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz and President Bush are all sitting here saying, well, you know what? Saddam Hussein aids and abets terrorists, and we'll give them WMDs, and they will use them against America in a second attack. And that led to the authorized use of military force against Iraq. The same authorization to use military force that we're utilizing today in Syria and Yemen and all these different places. And that was the precursor to 2003 and the invasion of Iraq. October 2022 or 2002, they say, cool, we're going in, UN inspectors. They went in, didn't find any WMD. We don't believe you. You must be the best hide and seek players of all time, Colin Powell said. And then now, 19 March, we give him a deadline for Saddam to actually step down as the dictator of Iraq. He does not, because of course not. And then now March 19th of 2003 occurs, and we have OIF. So that's kind of what we're leading up to as the next iteration of big Weasel operations. So leading up to OIF, like as you're a young Viper pilot, graduate from the academy in 95, right? 95 grad?
Yep.
Cool. So like leading up to that point, you're about 7 years in, like what did Weasel training look like in the early years of your career, as far as just like your upgrades and the technology and the integration of HTS pod onto the Viper that the F4G didn't have.
Right. So my first exposure to seed, not weaseling, I would say seed, was at Kunsan, because you had the Juvats, which were the Harm Squadron, Dumb Harm Squadron, and then you had the Pantons that were the Maverick Squadron. So I ended up horse trading and pissing a lot of people off and working my way into the Juvats. Just had a lot of friends there, and so the first time I'm a young guy and I'm getting this training, because we didn't have HTS pods on it. It was a big mouth Block 30, and we would occasionally do this mission where you into the upfront controls, you would type in a bunch of 3-digit numbers, LNOTs and stuff like that, and then you would point a certain direction and you would hit the red button and you were supposed to say Magnum, right? And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, all right. And you get into the books and you start learning, I learned what gigahertz means and things like that. So that was my first exposure. I certainly would not call that weaseling. That was just dumb harm. They were, and it was preemptive weapon EOM type shots, right? And then I got to Misawa, and that's where I learned it, right? So we had HTS pod, and I couldn't tell you what rev we were on, maybe rev 4 or 5. I don't remember. And then this is pre MMC, so block 50 tape 4 or 5 maybe. So green screens. NVGs were kind of still newish. So based on my experience at Kunsan, I got thrown into the NVG upgrade right when I got there. And it was like, everybody was like, this is great. We don't have to take the glow sticks and tape and everything in the cockpit before, like the jets are all NVIS modded. And so I got thrown in the NVG upgrade fairly quick there. Everything was green, so you kind of flew around with FCR B-scope on the left MFD, and you had HSD, which really just had a root and maybe a cap, and had on the right side. So we didn't have targeting pods. Block 50s didn't. Block 40s and striking wheels had lantern pods at the time. And so literally it was like FCR SMIS on one side and also weapon, right? So your harm is a
weapon page.
So FCR SMIS weapon on the left MFD and HSD and HAD on the right MFD. And there was really not much else to look at. Had your RWR, ALR 56, all that stuff. And we were, if I remember correctly, I think we were on the second or third iteration of Chapter 7 and 3-1, right? So because, like I said, Seed came to the Viper kind of mid 90-ish. So I get to Misawa in 2000. So we're still fairly early into the Viper Seed. So Chapter 7 was about that big, right? And then it became Chapter 9, and
probably could still find some F4 references in the chapter.
Probably. So we focused a lot on force packaging, right? So your basic force ship, get to the cap, sync up your cap. So there's always, and it used to be, direct cap, a line cap, a bow tie, and a triangle cap, the taco cap, all that stuff. And then it was all, in 3-1 is these are the situations you might cap. This might be the best situation, best kind of cap for this kind of, and it was all based on how deep the strikers were going to penetrate the mez. And then, if it was a little bit different scenario, then you might flow through with the strikers. And then it was like, well, is it going to be number 3 out front? Is it going to be number 1 up front? And what's the distance? How far in front? But it was because it was new enough. It was fairly, simple, I guess is maybe not the right word, but it was digestible. And man, you got to remember when I was at Misawa, we were flying probably, I'd say my 3.5 years roughly at Misawa average probably just under 300 hours a year, right? So
flying your
that's
ass
a
off.
lot of reps. That's a lot of reps, and we got to get really good at everything, right, including the basics. And I'll kind of stray from Seed for a little. Just an example. So as a brand new flight lead, right, I would be flying anywhere from 4 to 7 times a week, because we used to do a lot of pit and goes. So it wasn't abnormal to fly 20 times a month, right? And And so, I would get a CT two ship, right? CT, what's that, right? We used to do plenty of it. And so I'd talk to my wingman and I'd be like, here's what we're going to do today, dude. We're going to split. You're going to go 30 miles. Here's our points. You're going to go 30 miles north. I'm going to go 30 miles south over the Sea of Japan. And today we are going to work on notches, right? And the objective is for you and I to break each other's lock. So we're going to turn in fights on. But we had the sorties to do that, right? So we would just we'd spend half the sortie where, maybe even 20 miles apart. I'd be like, I'm going to get below you. You lock me up and I'm going to try to break your radar lock, right? And so you would do things like, okay, you would time your G and time your chaff bundle to you'd lose a spike. You're like, holy shit, it worked, right? And so think about that. Think about if you had an hour split at 30 minutes each side to vary the time that you hit the chaff slap switch. And this isn't the air, this isn't the sim, and we're getting real-time feedback as you lose the spike and the dude's like, hey, I lost the lock. So that is the environment that I grew up in. And so you can imagine the proficiency that allowed us to build when a dude can just take a two ship and dedicate an hour to just breaking each other's radar lock 1v1.
Yeah, that's the thing that I hope we don't. I mean, we're starting to stray from it. Is that there are skills that will travel that work literally anywhere, just like your basic threat reaction, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to work in no matter what theater. What I see in training at times is we're going to go fight insert country here.
Yeah.
It's and we just go do this big complex LFE and stuff like that. And the basics are out to lunch. They are awful. And it's if you really just were efficient with your time, like you guys were, and that's what the environment I grew up in. I remember a sortie where we went out and used 2 hours in a Viper, flew a 1.8, 2.0
Mm-hmm.
of just harm timing. I think I shot 60 harm in one sortie.
Yep.
It's
Nailed
shot
it,
harm. And you're hey, and if it's not T00, on it counted in plus 4 second increments. So it was either 4 seconds early, 8 seconds early, 10 seconds or 12 seconds late. But if it's not 0, we're doing it again. If it's not 0, we're doing it again.
Well,
and, just getting so good.
The thing is, we know this, right? And one of the problems is, and again, it's not the aviators or the young captains' fault. It's the environment that they're placed in. But we know, in sports psychology and sports training, I think is probably the nearest analogy to flying fighters, right? So, football is what I used to play, so I'll use football as the analogy. Imagine what we've done in the fighter business is we've gone from having a week to practice for next week's game to being told, hey man, you no longer have the week to practice. You have these 3 days and you can only practice 3 hours a day on those 3 days. And here's the times you can practice. And so you're doing the best you can. And so because you've got this limited, you don't get that Monday, Tuesday fundamental walkthrough blocking, tackling. And it's oh shit, it's Thursday. We got a game Sunday and we got to run plays. Right. And that's where I find, at least as somewhat of an outsider right now, I watch this and that goes to your point of we do these complex things. Well, the resource constraints are such that it's a choice between
it drives you there.
Bad answer, right? And I don't know, man. I don't envy the guys that are doing this right now. If I was a weapons officer right now, I'd have no hair because I'd pull it out trying to figure out the right balance of how do I get that fundamental proficiency while also getting guys ready to fight tomorrow, right? And that's a tough nut to crack. I don't envy you guys on that.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's kind of why we're having these conversations, right? Is say, okay, so how do you within this environment still get at least via words, some of the things that, okay, but this other stuff is incredibly important and you have to find time for it. So whenever you can find it, let's have a sit down and talk about it. And you can have basic seed discussions in the bar, like as we always have, before we go fight the hordes, if you will.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
if I could,
good.
well, no. I mean, we'll get to. I'll jot down a note of something that's kind of related that I'll talk
Oh,
about.
for sure. Oh yeah. Like, and then now, like, so as you're kind of towards the end is with the Viper is the tech, like you've kind of discussed of, we went to the dumb harm squadron. So for our listeners back then, what Vandal was kind of talking about is, yeah, you would type harm, like UTC IDs or LNOT IDs
Knots
into it. And then you would hand that off, like type it in, hand it off, or use harm as a sensor. We talked about the F4G didn't use harm as a sensor, didn't have a screen or a display to see that the harm powered on the wing could actually detect radar emissions as well. But that was the thing in the Viper on the weapon page. And like, that's how you could actually see a SAM before potentially it was actively shooting at you on your scope.
In fact, you would, if it was in the frequency range, because the harm didn't do as much processing with the signal as the HTS did. So the harm would display it to you immediately. Now it might be higher propensity for misidentifying the beam, but it'll show you it's there.
Absolutely, and no range. Just
Right.
like you could approximate range by your altitude, dip angle, like below 2 lines was about this, like
you had the
left,
water
right.
line. Yep, you had the water line,
Yep.
and you would basically, based on your altitude and how far down the water line it showed up, you had a pretty good idea of it.
Yep. And then just like the weapon EOM, like the equations of merit, like you take a harm, you shoot it, and now it's cutting angles to range itself to actually radiation home, and then overall hit the target. But as you guys are going in, we're going to jump.
I'm a seed nerd. I got to correct you. It's equations of motion.
Equation of motion. Sorry, misspeak. I agree. Equation of motion. My bad. I'm out of the. No, this is what. Sorry. But yeah, as we're talking about getting into being seed nerds, is they took the dude out of the back seat. Is like the next evolution is that basically all the things that the EWO did, not again they were critical to the seed mission. And if you talk to any weasel from Vietnam to Desert Storm, they were just like, hey, our EWO and Wizzo in the back was like critical to our weaseling. But right. What they did was they put all of those beeps and squeaks like into the HTS pod and into the harm and into your guys' displays. And now you as the pilot were kind of taking all that information in. That's so right. When you guys were going out there and you were integrating those tactics to you were doing all of that ambiguity processing and what is this threat, handing off the right beam to the harm and taking those shots and shooting him with different tactics. But now, and you guys have done that, you're trained, you're ready to go. Leading up to 2003, you'd done Southern Watch, Northern Watch, anything else like in Iraq? Did you, before 2003, you had been to Iraq how many times?
So I had done Northern Watch in 2001. And in fact, I had just showed up to Turkey as Advon when 9/11 happened. So, I mean, it was, funny. I was in our vault. We shared the Block 50 shared the vault with the Kadena Eagles, who we were combat paired with. And me and a guy named Musket had just showed up Advon for the Samurai. And the Panther weapons officer, Hack Jackson, good friend of mine, I ended up taking a squadron over from him. He was the Panther weapons officer. And we were going through the standards and, doing the handoff. And all of a sudden, the Kadena weapons officer, Shadow Ford, just ran into him a couple weeks ago, popped his cranium into he's like, hey, man, an airplane just hit the World Trade Center. We're like, oh, geez, probably some doctor in his light twin. And then, we go back to it. And then he comes in, 30-40 minutes later, whatever the time was. And he was like, another one just hit. And we were just like, we stopped, packed up, went back to the dorms, and there's probably about 10, 15 of us all glued to the TV. And I got there just in time to see the first tower fall. And we were like, oh, shit. And so within probably minutes, we were getting word from the maintainers that all the jets are getting loaded with live. Everything is loaded up because nobody knew, right? And I'm kind of like, holy cow, I'm here with a different squadron. I'm not even with my squadron. So anyway, eventually, when the smoke cleared, our the rest of our main body was delayed, but they did get out of there. So the previous squadron got out of there, and then we lived post 9/11 for the next 3 months in Turkey. There were some silly politics, because then that during that time we started uh, flights, or operations in Afghanistan. And so President Bush at the time, in Northern Watch, we went all the way to the line, right? And you'd go places. There's like Talifar Woods and Sifany. There were certain places that were hot spots. Like, that's not where you wanted to be with the Piddle Pack, because that was where there were some gun emplacements, and they'd start shooting at you and stuff like that. So you'd play this cat and mouse game with them, and then you'd fly over Mosul. So pretty much shortly after our squadron got there, presidentially directed, we couldn't go as far south, couldn't get as close to the line, and we're like, what's going on? And the word we got was, the president does not want to see a video of an American pilot getting drugged through the streets of Mosul, a la Black Hawk Down, right? And he was like, the focus is Afghanistan. He does not need that. So we kind of started kind of staying away from the super, and kind of just stayed in northern Iraq. So anyway, so we did that. And then, of course, as we start going to Afghanistan, we're like, sweet, we're in place, we're ready to go. And it's military politics, right? So Incirlik is a UCOM base, and UCOM wanted his boys and in the Afghanistan fight. So we basically sat for 2 weeks while Spang came in and Lakenheath came in, and we were giving them their DTC loads, giving them our desert flight suits, and loading their loads and stuff like that. And they would escort the C-17s into northern Afghanistan. And we literally sat for 2 weeks. The good news is, it was Turkey, so we could drink whiskey. So we would sit out there every night, drinking our whiskey, watching the Spang and Lakenheath Bubbas, afterburners aglow at night, going into Afghanistan while we drank whiskey. And we're like, man, that is really inefficient. You've got an Eagle squadron and a Block 50 squadron in theater that is familiar, that has to sit for 2 weeks because the 4-star wants his guys in the fight, right? Now, I don't know if there's more complex, but that was pretty clear cut. And then 2 weeks later, they left, and we went right back to Northern Watch.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. And then, yeah. And then kind of that was the focus. And then all of a sudden we're just like, all right, we're invading Iraq. And it's because of 9/11. And you're just like, but whatever. That's where we are. Because that was and so as we're kind of going in, and now this is the time we're getting into it. So, just like you were talking about Northern Watch, Southern Watch, you had the 2 no-fly zones. You had the North no-fly zone, the South no-fly zone.
Right.
But basically it was, you didn't go far enough. You guys had done some work to take out the air defenses on Northern Watch, Southern Watch, or on the like the Northern third, Southern third. And then the middle third that contained Baghdad. Mm-hmm. General Mosley, you can tell me if it was appropriately named here in a second, but deemed it the Supermez.
Supermez,
and
yeah.
So as he's calling it the Supermez. So as you guys are kind of going into there, lead up to going in, what did you guys like? Now you've been told like you guys are going to Iraq and you're going downtown. It's OIF. We're invading. We're doing this. What was the lead up to that like? What was your assessment of the threat? What was going on inside of the squadron at that time? And then you just go, I'll throw some questions in here, but I'm just here to listen as well, because I want to hear this. And like night one, or your first experience with OIF.
Yeah, so I'll start from the kind of the beginning point of what you asked, right? The lead up. So the way it kind of used to go, right? The OSW, ONWR squadron, you go to OSW 1 year, the next year you do ONW, and they were not. I thought it was great as a young fighter pilot. I'm like, oh my God, we're a desert flight suit. I'm doing the thing, even though you're not getting to shoot as much. I almost, we can talk about that story another time, but I almost shot of harm, and I actually got in Northern Watch when I was there, and I ended up getting more credit for holding off on the shot than for shooting it. But it was a total judgment call. But so then it used to be that if you went the previous year, then you wouldn't go the next year and things like that. And so I did Northern Watch, like I said, from September to December, call it 2001. And then we're getting ready for our Southern Watch deployment that's going to happen late 2002, right? Fall 2002. And basically the geopolitical situation, there was like smoke signals starting to go up. And my squadron commander, Zot Dennis, outstanding commander, he's like, all right, need to know who's volunteers for Southern Watch and this and that. And I was a flight commander at the time, pre-weapon school, and but had my heart set on going to weapon school. And so he kind of called me in his office. He's like, hey, based on the timeline and based on where you are as a flight lead, you're in line for IPUG. I know you want to go to weapon school, but he's like, I remember this conversation really well because it was like, nut cutting time. He said, we have a pretty good idea that this Southern Watch OSW deployment is going to turn into something more than Southern Watch. Don't know when, don't know where, but we think it will. So I obviously want to take my blue T hitters. I remember that term. And he's like, I'd love to take you. You don't have to go because you didn't go. You went last time. But the thing you need to decide is if you decide to go, the spin up is probably going to prevent you from finishing the IPUG, and that is going to prevent you from going to weapon school, right? So he's like, I need to know kind of where you're at on that, right? And it didn't, I kind of, I didn't have to think about it, and I just told him, I was like, sir, it doesn't make sense for me to want to go to weapon school so that I can lead fighter pilots into combat, but then forego the opportunity to lead fighter pilots in combat so I can go to weapons school to learn how to lead fighter pilots in combat, right? So I said, and it was like
I'm with you.
Because it was one of those things where I was like, holy cow, man, I'm about to shut the door on at the time, which is, after getting to the airplane of my choice, after getting the assignment of my choice, it was like the next thing that it was the thing I wanted was to go to weapons school. And so it was kind of a gut punch. I'm like, okay, but I mean, I was at peace with this because I'm like, I am not going to forego the chance to fly in a major theater war to go to weapons school. And much to my squadron leadership's credit, and I can't thank them enough for it, they still ended up getting me done with the IPUG and keeping me on the weapons school track, even though I had told them I'd rather. So, I mean, I was incredibly blessed to have the leadership that I did. So I did. They finished me up and they got me done with IPUG, and I made the cut to go on the Southern Watch team. And so we took a lot of experience, so we get there and we flew Southern Watch. It was supposed to be a 90-day rotation, and we got word pretty early on that we're going to be extended. We're like, yep, shocker.
Yep.
And then kind of as things started coalescing, like, we would get more and more aggressive with our posture in Southern Watch. The vols started, doing night vols and things like that, kind of the preparation of the battlefield, conditioning forces for certain things, started doing some, it was almost like in the movies, man. I had a day where me and young wingman, Ping Maxwell, we were in the dorms. The dorms built by the Bin Laden construction company, by the way.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we were in the dorms, and the STI, it wasn't the STI, it was the TAC phone, I guess, rings, and I go get it, and it's my OPSO Rhino, and he's like, "Are you and Ping still in the dorms?" I'm like, "Yep." He's like, "Don't come into work. Put yourself in crew rest immediately, and we'll tell you more about it when you show up. Show up at this time." And so I'm like, "Hey, this is great, Ping. We're on a secret mission, dude. Go back to sleep or do something, or we'll meet." And And
It's easy to sleep after those phone calls.
Yeah. And so I don't know. We showed up at 6 or 7 in the evening, whatever it was, and it was like, hey, you're leading a 2-ship seed support. And it was this whole feint of like the package is going to do this over here, and then there's these strike eagles out of LUD that are going to be skirting along the border, and you're going to be the seed escort for them, and we're going to have the package over here. Say, hey, look at us, and you guys are going to sneak in. And it was taking out an EW radar. Somewhere in Western Iraq, right? Speaking of the first thing we talked about on dogging on our fellow fighter pilots, they missed. But anyway, but it was cool because it was
Sorry,
me
guys.
and Ping, and all of Western Iraq was ours. And so we're the 2-ship, radar set. And it's like, come on, can somebody please come out here? And but anyway, so we did stuff like that. And then about a month, I'd say, before the war kicked off, we kind of established a day team and night team. And I was one of the 2 flight commanders that was there. And so I ended up on the night team, and the other flight commander, Tits Tittle, he ended up on the day team. And so we kind of got into our battle rhythm, right? And I got that nice little slice right across the nose that you get from, flying with NVGs for 5 hours at a time. Started using the moleskin and whatnot, and we established our battle rhythms. And we kind of pseudo combat paired, not quite. Our team was small enough to where you weren't necessarily, there wasn't a huge crowd to fly with, so you kind of end up flying with a similar, just about that 2 or 3 wingmen. And that was it. And then the battle rhythm picked up. I mean, there was just this thing in the air where you're like, man, something's we know what's going down, right? And it was just the thing changed. I have to tell this story because it's kind of an indication of, a lot of times there's a lot of things we see, and that's absurd, right? And I want you and the folks that are watching to rest assured, absurdity is not a new thing. Absurdity has been around for a long time. So I remember the wing commander and the vice wing commander wanting all of PSAB. And PSAB was like a major force. Like, it's a massive Prince Sultan Air Base, massive ramp. So there's, heavy support aircraft, I don't know, 4 or 5 different fighter squadrons, unnamed MDSs, just, it was a lot. And so a few nights before the war kickoff, we get this, hey, all air crew, we're going to do the post or pre-war rah-rah win-win for the Gipper speech, right? And we're like, this is going to be great. We're going to go in there, and we are there's going to be blood dripping from the wing commander's teeth, and he's going to be like, I want you to kill them all, and blah, 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 win-win, and all this stuff. And dude, it was the most disappointing thing because it was very mellow. It was very mellow. And then the vice wing gets up and he says, look, guys, we're going to be going into combat ops, but I just want you guys to know that dress and personal appearance is still a thing. I don't want to see hats crooked. I don't want to. And I was just I'm like, what? What are we doing here? And so I was just it was such a, again, silliness is nothing new. And as a young captain, I'm like, man, we are about to embark on the mission of a lifetime. This is going to be a thing that everybody that participates in it is a significant life milestone. We're going into major theater war.
We're going to talk about it 22. We're going to talk about it 22 years later.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about how we're going to wear our hats during wartime. Yeah, I was just like, oh my God. And then everybody kind of yeah, whatever, dude. And
all right, back on it.
Yeah. And so then we about two or 3 nights before the war started, we really started ramping up, really pushing our forces up to the super mess, right up to the line, just here we are, because they didn't know when HR was. And so every day we started acting like it was H hour. Funny, and I got sent to the KAOC about 2.5 weeks. You had to have your seed LNO, and I got sent to the KAOC 2.5. And I go to my commander. I was like, hey, I'm I'm not here for the war, right? No, like, no. We're bringing you back before night one, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, I don't want to get sent to the chaos and miss the party. And, so we did that. Funny story. I think the Brits were in Kuwait, just south of Basra, and they're the Brit ground forces commander there. Like the Iraqis, like come across. They're waving the white flags, and he's like, "Hey, thank you." And now that I know, but you can't surrender tonight. Surrender tomorrow, right? Because the war hadn't started yet. So he had to tell him, so,
They knew. They knew.
yeah. So it was interesting stuff like that. I had a big learning experience at the KAOC. This is like a week before the war. Again, flag that if you want to talk about it later. But it's kind of seed related. But like I said, I don't want to derail your discussion. But we can talk. About
this is your discussion. We're hearing your story, man. You tell us.
Okay. Yeah. So I was a seed LNO. And we had Prowler guys there. So I was the Block 50 LNO, and this is about a week before the war. And they had the stow, like the super national level stuff. And he was a Prowler guy, and he comes up to me and is like, "Hey man, I need to talk to you." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, on this, like 2 nights from now on this vol, I need like 2 CJs right up here on this area just south of Baghdad, looking this way, ready for anything." I'm like, "Oh, can you tell me more?" He's like, "No." He's like, "I just need that." And so like I start, I look at the gap flow and I'm like, okay, it's not PSAB guys. It's going to have to be, okay, the LUD guys, the SPAN guys that are flying at LUD, that'll be the fit. And so I call over to the MPC in LUD. It was my old Kunsan weapons officer, Nitro Hall, that I got on the phone. And I'm like, "Hey, man, I can't really tell you anything because I don't know, but these 2 guys, their tanker time and all that stuff makes sense. I need these 2 guys up here pointing north towards Baghdad around this time." He's like, "That's it." And he's like, "Yeah, we'll move some shit around, whatever. We'll make it happen." And I'm like, "All right, mission accomplished, done." I was like, "Yep, you're good." And this was like 3 days before I was supposed to be done with the KAOC, right? And so the last night I get in, and I walk in, I take my replacement in there to just kind of show them around, and there's a phone call, and it's the OG at Al Udeed. And dude, I have never gotten my ass ripped on the phone so bad. And it's like, "Who the fuck do you think you are directing my forces? This and that, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Ooh, sorry, sir." Yeah. And then, so I hang up, and right as I hang up the phone, there's a guy like on the other side of the KAOC, and I see him. He's like, "There he is," pointing at me. And I'm like, and here walks an admiral.
It's the cops, run.
Yeah. So I was like, "What the hell?" And so he's like, "Vandal, were you see at Illinois? You're the guy?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." He's like, "Come with me." So I'm walking with, if I have my stories right, I think it's a Navy 06, Navy captain. And we're walking up to the stairs, and you don't ever go upstairs at the KAOC, right? They're taking me upstairs. And so Mosley was a CFAC, the deputy CFAC, I want to say, was like an admiral, and then Kangaroo, who had been the F-16 weapons school commander when I was a maintenance officer there, was now a 1-star. So Kanga was up there. He probably didn't remember me, but I remembered him. And so he was up there. And so there's like, some stars and some birds, and
Captain Vandal.
Like, I got him. And as we're walking up the stairs, the Navy 06 just looks at me, and he's just kind of chuckling, shaking his head. He's like, "You have no idea why you're here, do you?" And I was like, "No, sir." And he's just like, "All right, well, you'll probably be all right. Just tell him the truth." And I'm just kind of like, "What the hell is going on?" Right. And so then they're like, "Hey, talk to us about this thing where you directed these 2 Vipers to do this and that and that." And I was kind of like, "Oh, yes, sir." So
you're gonna want to find this Prowler guy.
Yeah, and well, I talked him through the whole thing, and anyway, and they kind of realized that like this dumbass captain didn't know what the hell he was doing. He was just kind of I was like, yeah, it's just I got asked by a bro to make some shit happen, and I did. And turns out what happened was this was some kind of national level tasking that they had gotten in the stow vault. So the dude just came out and is like, yeah, I'll talk to the seat. And it's a bunch of captains maybe just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But then the CFAC tends to get pissed when captains and majors start moving his forces around and nobody tells him. So what happened was this dude, and because when we were having this discussion, I was like, "You're going to run this up the battle cab, right?" He was like, "Oh yeah, totally." I'm like, "Okay, got it." So what had happened was this was a national level tasking, I think NRO, NSA, whatever, and then it had gotten canceled. Well, one, it had never gotten briefed to the CFAC because it was all in the secret squirrel world. And then two, when it got canceled, nobody undid the things that I had done. So like word gets out, like what, who's doing what, who got directed? And, because I'm sure the LUD leadership was like, why is this captain
These
calling
two
us
Van Vipers just like pointed at this?
And so anyway, so I mean, I had no scar tissue necessarily. I went back to the squadron. I found my commander. I was like, hey, sir, you may hear about this, but I don't know if it was an ass chewing, but General Rue was in there. There was an admiral. I don't know who.
I don't know if it was an ass chewing.
And because nobody yelled at me, they were just you could tell they were all like seasoned fighter pilots. They're like, this poor captain just got bamboozled, and so I mean, all's well that ends well. It never, but it was.
That's right.
It was a learning thing for me about accountability and just having random guys step out of the vault asking you for favors.
Well, I mean, I've gotten my ass chewed before. But
it was a pretty gentle ass chewing because
it's like as you walk up, like anytime you're standing there, and I remember, I don't know, but I remember walking in. There's incident in Afghanistan where you walk in and there's just like a lieutenant sitting there at a computer like this with the OG, a 1-star. It was Gus Costello. So actually, I think,
yeah,
1-star. But like Gus is standing behind him, the OG squadron commander and 2 weapons officers, and he's just sitting there watching tapes. And I walk in, I was like, that's not good. And the entire squadron was just like, not the time, Flash. Not the time. Not the time to make jokes. But
that's right.
All right. So you're back in the squadron. It's we're doing it. We're doing the thing. One of the largest strike packages since Desert Storm. 1,700 sorties on night 1. You guys are going in and like the Weasel package of Vipers. What were you guys tasked to support, and what ended up happening?
Yeah. So night 1, and like I'll preface the second part of the answer is, I would say probably the first 3 or 4 nights of OIF, of shock and awe, we fought like we trained. And then it seemed like there was a break point, and don't hold me to this. I don't know if it was night 4, night 5. I can't tell you. It seemed like there was a point where somebody at the KAOC took 3-1 and just threw it away. And then we started doing stuff that, we can talk about this, that where it was not necessarily like the way we trained, right? So night 1, Zot, who I mentioned before, he was obviously going to lead the first 4-ship over Baghdad. So prior to that, remember my squadron, the Samurai, were there doing Southern Watch. As the ramp up to combat ops started, they brought in the gamblers from Shaw and put them. So we plussed up horses and stuff like that. So they showed up. I couldn't tell you, but maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month before the actual hostilities kicked off. So we kind of divvied it up to where early on, shock and awe, it seemed like the Samurai kind of had Baghdad. And maybe that was just, hey, you've been here long enough, whatever. I don't know what the decision behind that. And the gamblers had kind of the Western Scud hunt, which was a real big thorn, right? Everybody, we got to get these Scuds. We cannot have one of these things land in Israel and draw them into the conflict or any of that kind of stuff. And then also the Northern fight into Tikrit. In the meanwhile, we have the 55th, and I can't remember who else, maybe one of the Spang squadrons at Incirlik. ready for the northern push. Well, Turkey's like, yep, we're not playing in this. And so those guys were up there, if my memory serves me right. So we pretty much had to flow in from the south, handle Tikrit and the western fight. So anyway, like I said, Zot and Diver was my weapons officer at the time, Diver Ulmer. He was number 3 on Zot's 4-ship. They had 2 wingmen. And so he was the first, it's like they're like first manned fighters over Baghdad is I think what we used to say. And so they showed up, and it was nighttime. They showed up kind of into their seed cap, kind of just southwest part of Baghdad, as the T-LAMs and the initial cruise missile strikes were happening.
Yep,
right?
Like all
that stuff, the shock and awe type stuff. And then I was scheduled to lead the next flight. And so we were going to do the handoff and the high five. He leaves the cap. I'm off the tanker. And so it was force package. So they get on station, big LO, B2s, F-117s, with folks, standoff weapons and things like that. And then as they go off station, I'm supposed to be seed for the next wave of strikers, right? And again, so we generally tended to have southwest of Baghdad. And I want to say, I think it was the Stingers, the squadron I went to after weapons school, who were coming out of Al Udeid, who were kind of the southeast of Baghdad. So we're kind of, if my nugget is Baghdad, we had seed caps kind of looking this way. And then we also had folks not as much up north yet. So I have, just based on the number of jets we have, Zot took a 4-ship, and I had a 2-ship, Ping Maxwell, same guy I flew with the night before the war. All 3x1 by gun and 2 harms, and HTS pod, obviously. So and
Lord's loadout.
The Zot is a very even-keeled dude, right? And there's a reason I'm telling you this. You never really heard him get emotional on the radio or raise his voice or lower. I mean, he was just always has been just a pretty even-keeled dude in the air. Former WIC IP. He was actually an IP at weapons school when I was a maintenance officer there, so I've known him for quite a while. And so as I'm getting off tanker, and everybody's on the same seed common, right? That was the thing. Every Prowler and every Block 50, we were on the same VHF. So you can imagine comm discipline being a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a seed common frequency. And so Zot's 4-ship is kind of fencing out and about to hit Saudi airspace to get their post-vol tank. As I've just come off my pre-vol tank, and I can hear some chatter on aux, and Zot, reaches out to me on aux. And again, remember, he's an even keel dude, very disciplined, calm. And I can't remember exactly how he started the conversation on aux. And he just tells me, he's like, dude, it's a rage, right? Very, very un-Zot-like. And I think I got those words correct, right? So, I remember that. And then verified by his wingman, right? So we were the Samurai Wood Merchants, and our Friday patch, it said, send us your champions. And I have it on pretty good authority that Zot did go to the Baghdad International BIAP tower frequency and tell them to send us your champion. We're like, you got to do the Samurai, send us your champions. He went on the frequency and actually told the Iraqi Air Force to send us your champions.
They did not.
They did not. Anyway, so I was, on station. I guess I got on station maybe 90 minutes after the initial kind of, shock and awe started. So I was the second.
Right where you want to be.
Yeah, and it was, dude, I'll tell you, it was the most surreal thing, because I was a senior in high school when Desert Storm kicked off, and I remember, my senior year, second semester, I was trying to get into the academy. I hadn't been accepted yet, and just glued to my TV with the old grainy Wolf Blitzer CNN reporting, and you see all the grainy green stuff flying around and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, it must be nuts. And I talked to guys that flew 117s there, and they're like, yeah, man, we were at 3,000 AGLs, like trying to run through the sprinklers without getting wet. It was nuts, right? And so I remember all that. And so I get on station, kind of the just southwest of Baghdad, into the seed cap, and it is, dude, in my NVGs, it was like, I'm like, holy shit. This was, whatever, 10 years ago. I was a senior in high school watching this, and I'm like, I'm in it now. Right. And it was an incredibly, like, just a surreal moment, right? Where in my own NVGs, I'm seeing, kind of what I remember in high school and wondering what it must have been like. I'm like, now I know. And so we, Ping had the first, so we had 2 assigned pet shots. So I gave Ping the first one, and then mine was second. And, like, we get on station and you're just watching shit blow up all over Baghdad. And I remember thinking, it was like, it just looked like a city, right? Like, you'd be looking out an airline window and you see all the lights and lines and some
Roads
brighter areas and stuff. You're like, wow, this is like super surreal. Like, I can't believe I'm here. And then the other thing was reference to previous discussion we had where, dude, we repped out on so many basics, right? So here's me and Ping line abreast at night. Ping calls attacking pet alpha. I look over my shoulder. I'm like, press, I go, and he calls magnum. And I just see this freaking telephone pole come off his jet, and it just freaking skies for the moon. And then the thing was, it was like, I learned really quick that as soon as you shoot a harm, you move your jet, because then all the guns start getting aimed at you and they just start taking pot shots in your direction because they see the rocket motor, right? Because we're all blacked out and stuff like that. But when you see a big old space shuttle coming off in airborne, they know to start shooting in that direction. And then it was like, magnum, and he, we turn and he looks and he's like, one press. And so it was weird, because it was almost like, for me, I felt like it was almost an out of body experience, because it was like, man, this, like, you could replace the lights of Baghdad and replace them with the fishing boats over the Sea of Japan. It was like, man, I have been here 1,000 times, right? And so it was just, there's obviously the heart rate and seeing actual hot metal kind of coming in your direction that adds, quite a bit to it. But it was one of those things where there was just no surprises. I'm like, dude, like, the comm sounded the same because we'd done it so many times. And then I get ready for my pet shot. And that was also kind of surreal, because even though I'd already figured out from watching Ping shot that, like, as soon as you shoot, you got to move, right? Because we're not like far away from Baghdad. We're over the southwest part of Baghdad, the Supermez, if you will. Yeah. And so I magnum, and my first time I've ever shot, a harm, and it, kind of the flash, it, washes out your gogs a little bit, and you hear the, and literally I just got enamored and almost kind of froze, because I'm just like, almost like drooling into my mask, just watching this glowing orb take off like it's going to the moon. And then all of a sudden shit starts blowing up around you. You're like, oh yeah, we got to move. So, we stand back to the edge. And then, my plan was we were going to just freaking shoot these 2 pets and then just kind of do an arc, kind of pull the threat, kind of 70-ish degrees off and just arc until we know the strikers are gone. There were some Navy bomb cats, because they had started doing bombing off the boat that were involved in that one. And I just remember, as I turned sideways, start arcing, I just keep following this missile, right? And keep following it. And then eventually you got the booster, it's bright, then the sustainer. And then the sustainer goes out, but you can still see the back end because it's so hot, right? So you can watch this green glowing thing. And I watch it apex. I watch it, start descending into Baghdad. And I can't take my eyes off of it, because here's this, 900 pounds of shit that I have just slung at this urban thing. I mean, that could be, I'm from Dallas. I was like, that looks like DFW out the window when I'm coming in on American Airlines, right? And so I'm just watching that, and I see it start going downhill, and then it starts like rapidly scooting across. I'm like, oh, it's gone into glide, EOM glide, whatever.
Gone glide, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So because it was a pet shot, right? Nothing was on there. And then I just watch it, and it's just one light. The only way I can see it, it looks like every other light, but it's moving like super fast across all the other lights. And then just a little mouse part just goes up, and I'm just like,
Okay.
yeah, all right, And anyway, I'm like, okay, that was great. And then we start our arc the other direction. So I'm like, all right, now I'm going to turn around, and that's when we had divvied up our has search. I was gonna search. I can't remember guides or tracks, and he was going to search the other. I think I was definitely searching tracks. So we had divvied up which table.
Apologies. Gonna interrupt you real fast because
Yeah.
what you just said there is like because that was something for like what Curly said is he shot harm. They ended up loading up Shrikes towards the end of 91.
Right.
But like when you put that thing in the EOM glide, like equations of motion, like is that dog will hunt. Like if it doesn't find the thing you handed off, like that dog will hunt and it'll go hit whatever you want. But then when Vandal's talking about dividing up the harm tables, if you will, we got what, 8? It was 8, right? 8 beams for the has.
No, tons
Was it
of
6,
beams.
8?
You could put 6 in each table.
That's right. Okay, yeah, you got 6, and it's like, hey, you had tons of beams, but it's like, but then the has processing is like, as you're looking there, is like, so you would divide up beams to actually put into the one remaining harm. So like when number 2 is looking at something, you're looking at something else. You guys, like that was part of weaseling, was knowing what beams we wanted to search for and knowing the threat area that you were specifically assigned to.
That's right.
Sorry to interrupt.
No. That's perfect. It's like the seed equivalent of your FCR search, where like 1 might be searching surfacing up, and 2 is responsible for 50,
I'm going here,
whatever. And so we're just going to not that we're not going to search for the other ones, but this is our primary responsibility, right? So I kind of do a 180-ish back. So instead of arcing to the northeast, now I'm arcing to the northwest. And dude, no sooner do I turn around. And as a flight lead, I'm looking at my FCR, and it's very clear they're Iraqis not being big night flyers. Like nothing is happening because we were glued to the FCR. I'm like, come on, like just show me one brick, right? Something, right? So nothing. And so I felt a little bit more comfortable looking at more has and less FCR. And we had tons of EW and AWACS coverage and stuff like that. So I certainly was not worried about getting jumped by a MiG or something like that. In the middle of the night over Baghdad. So as I turn around, man, I see a SA2 track beam pop up on my harm as a sensor on my weapon page, and it is like almost off the page. It is so low on the waterline, right? And then it was another surreal thing where I don't remember any conscious thoughts. All right. And so literally, I just know that my fingers started doing random shit. And it was almost like I was not in control of them. And I call attacking and I call magnum. And you remember every other harm we've shot. So this is our 3rd harm that's getting shot tonight. Is, it comes off and it starts skying to the moon, does its EOM glide, all that stuff. This thing, I see the flash, and I never saw the missile because it came off my jet and just went straight down. So, I mean, it was, and it makes sense because the 2 track was way low on the waterline. It was almost off the scope. Like we were right on top of whatever it was, right? And so I call Magnum, we move, and then it was like an instant feeling of dread. Because, like I said, reference, the old cliche training took over. And like, I don't remember having a conscious thought about it. It was just this automatic reaction. And after I shot, my brain caught up to what had just happened. And it was just like, oh shit, was that in the course of the ROE? Did I screw that up? Like, did I screw up, the mode I was supposed to shoot it in? And so it was like this horrible feeling the rest of the time, because I'm like, man, I don't remember actually doing the thing and designating the threat and turning my jet. It just all happened. And it wasn't until afterwards that I'm like, man, I don't know if I did the right thing. And so, I kind of had the opportunity to stew about that all the way home, and went back, looked at the tape, and I was like, man, that was amazing. Like from detect to missile off the rail was something like 6 seconds. I mean, if that, right? And I'm like, and I looked and I'm like, whoo, clean, like
Did it right.
intercourse, everything. And again, I'm a young captain. This is the first night of a major theater war. I don't know how this game is played. I'm just, and so it was one of those, I was like, yeah, everything was legit, good to go. The
What was
missions,
the ROE?
uh,
What were you guys restricted in any manner?
yes, it was shoot in a mode that maximizes the chance for the harm impacting within Iraq.
Okay.
That was, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it was, Buzz Mosley was a CFAC and he's like, I want to kill SAMs. So it was not now, kind of what evolved, I'll say kind of pejoratively is what evolved later on as OIF and OEF kind of turned into WTDs. They became lawyer fought wars, right? And the ROE got more and more restrictive. And it was like, but dude, for the air war in Iraq, it was the ROE was mission effectiveness and don't shoot harms that'll impact outside Iraq. It was
which
basically
which which is which is a an important point to note is like through this again the history of weaseling is the weasels in Vietnam were heavily restricted,
yeah,
and then the weasels in Desert Storm no
right,
restrictions, get the job done. Seems
right,
like every time we go to Iraq for the first little while,
yeah.
like would you say first 5 weeks, I don't know,
Well, the air
is like
war.
his gloves are off.
Yep, that's right. It was
Allied force heavily
that's right.
restricted. You
That's
guys
right.
were not.
Yep, it was an allied force. NATO involvement. So there's a lot of
Yep.
that alliance satisfaction
Oh
and
yeah.
things like that. Everybody's got,
Oh
it's
yeah.
not just one set of lawyers. It's like 20 countries worth of lawyers. So yeah, we did not feel constrained ROE wise, and it wasn't. I don't mean to sound like make it sound flagrant. It wasn't, but it was the focus was mission effectiveness, right? And
Yes.
theater war,
Yep.
man. I mean, you can't fight
Your
with one
war.
hand tied behind your back. Lord knows we've tried it, and it doesn't work. And so it was. I looked at it. It was great. We during the war we had 4 reactive harm shots. The rest were all pets, and that was my only reactive, and that was one of the 4. Um, Interesting note: the samurai shot 69 harms. True statement. Nobody tried to do it,
Nice.
but we did shoot 69 harms.
But we did stop after that.
Yeah, it was like nobody shoot another harm. No. Um, so yeah, and I landed, and it was like me and Ping are kind of like high fiving each other, and we're kind of just like, man, we really like that just happened. Like holy buckets! Like it takes you a while to kind of spin down from that. I mean, he's a brand new captain, or he might have. No, I don't think he was. No, he might have still been a first lieutenant. Later went on to weapons school, and then flew F-22s for a while. And I was kind of I'd been a captain for like 3 years, 2 years. But you got to remember, I'm a young captain, brand new IP in the Viper, but I showed up there with almost 1,000 hours, right? And that's off of a year at Kunsan, 90 hours in the B course, a year at Kunsan, and almost a full 3 years. So maybe 800, 900 hours, right? Of because we're flying that almost 300 hours a year of good 1.3 at a time training, not just droning in left hand wheels. So that was night one.
There you go. No, that's awesome. Yeah, like the what jumps out at me is the fact of like you're both enamored with the scenario and the situation, but I've been here before. And
Yeah,
it's just like there's certain portions of the sortie where you're just like the harm coming off the rail and it climbing up to the moon and you're just being like, I'm gonna watch that thing because it's a bright shiny light. It's
yeah, yeah,
like, but then it all fell back to some of the training, and just like you said, you unconsciously, kind of not even subconsciously, but unconsciously hucked off a has shot against an SA2 so low on the waterline where it's almost a min range shot, which is an incredibly difficult shot, by the way. And then just doing that, and you're just like, I don't even know if I did it right.
yeah,
But you came back and you did that. It's like, so when you talked about like them throwing the 3-1 in the trash, did the Iraqis, did they present a threat picture to you guys that you guys weren't expecting? Like, you guys went in there, like the IADs holistically, as we've learned throughout history, was like some of the first shots of Desert Storm was taking out a lot of the ASV radars from Apaches and F-117s
Right.
and things like that. But then did they present anything to you that you weren't prepared for that required new tactics mid-war?
No, I think it was a recognition of, so we, everything we trained for was, assume they're going to use their, now, the Desert Storm. So my OPSO, Rhino Fowler, like from Central Casting, if you picked like a 70s F4 guy. So ironically, Rhino had flown in Desert Storm as a Weasel in F4s, with the WW tail flash. That was George Air Force Base at the time.
Yep.
Now, Desert Storm 2, if you will, he's my OPSO, and Misawa has the WW tail flash, and he's kind of coming up doing unfinished business.
Awesome. God, that's awesome.
With the same tail flash in a different airplane. So that was super cool. And if you looked up crusty old F4 driver in the dictionary, there'd probably be a picture of Rhino. Like, just, he was awesome. Very old school dude. So anyway, I don't think they presented a threat that made us change. It was the lack of threat that they end up presenting that I think made us change, right? So all assumptions were, almost Desert Storm style, even though, Rhino and his cohort in Desert Storm had done so well, conditioning the Iraqis to absolutely fear the Great White Hope, right? The harm.
Yep.
And to the point where they would, when they were out of harms, they wouldn't call Arizona. They would just keep making Magnum calls, and the dudes would shut down. So I think we had pretty good intel that this is, hell, 10 years later, they didn't all of a sudden, eat a bunch of spinach and become Popeye and not be afraid of the harm all of a sudden again, right? So that part was kind of expected. The unknown was always like, what's the Air Force going to do, right? And so obviously you're going to assume the worst case. Something, we figured something between what they did in Desert Storm, which they flew a lot of sorties, and zero. We did not expect that it was going to be zero, right? Something in between. And so, after, I guess, the first, I don't know, I'd call it the first week, maybe the majority of the first week, where, my second sortie was incredibly, it was the closest thing I would call to a religious experience. We, based on the amount of fire and actually my second and third, and threat reactions and things like that. But after that, call it after night 5, 6, the hostile fire became very sporadic. Majority of the SAMs that they shot were unguided, and they had gotten really good at like trying to get them to fuse at certain altitudes and things like that. So they started treating their SAMs, SA2s, 3s, 6s as kind of really high-end AAA, right?
Barrage fire AAA.
And occasionally you'd get a raw tickle or something like that, and but like, I think it was on my second sortie where, like me, and it was ping again, where we're glibbing right next to each other at night, and because we're in the beam width, right? And it's like, you look outside and you're like, dude, I don't know which one is guiding, because all I see is, based on when you look at all the AAA out there, because on GOGs you can see every piece of metal, and then they're launching so many ballistic SAMs that you're like, somewhere in this 15 or 20 SAMs that I'm looking at, one or two of them might be guiding my way, right? And it was almost like sensory overload, but luckily it was SA2s, right? And I tell people, I'm like, if there's a SAM that the SA2 was invented for the fighter pilot, because it's amazing, because it's not going to hurt you, but you still get to claim hero status for getting shot by a SAM, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, as long as you do, your threat, and the Glib 2 was fine. Like, what they call now the Ocho had just come into 3-1, which was the orthogonal, the freaking whifferdil. And we were training to it. And I looked at my weapons officer and I was just like, hey man, no offense, but I'm not going to freaking do this, because this is spatially disorienting. I can't look outside while he's like, yeah, I get it, man. And so we went right back to Glib 2, worked fine. And,
works just fine.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, I get it. This they called it the Sam Weave back then. I was like, I get the engineering and academically the Sam Weave is the thing, but it ain't executable, and I'm not gonna do it. And I'm here to talk about it.
Yeah.
So obviously the Glib 2 worked.
Worked out. It always was funny when I was a lieutenant in the A-10 when they teach me the glib, and I was just like, but I don't have burner. I don't have that. And but you're right. It's like get to the beam, make that thing do its time maneuver constant, like
Yep, that's right.
it's uplink to the missile, like make it do
Yep,
this and
yep.
go from
Maneuver
there,
time constant.
which
That's
is
right.
great because when I had the Vietnam conversation, obviously a very different perspective of the SA2.
Absolutely. And it's an F4, right? So you don't have it's an F4 versus an SA2, both kind of cutting edge back then, mano a mano.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm in a Viper that can turn up its own ass, and this is still the '60s era missile with some upgrades.
And a lot of those guys, like we're talking SA2V Thud, like the fact of the matter is just like the first indication that you had. I mean, like the epitome of weaseling of okay, I have to get them to shoot at me because that's how I see it with my eyeballs.
Right.
And you're just like that's the thing. But yeah, and even in Iraq and OIF, like there was an aborted. I mean, we still lost people in also, but there's also people on the ground that got captured. It was more some of this stuff, but there was an aborted CSAR because of looking out and seeing all the unguided SAMs that were just being ballistically launched into the air.
Yeah, and again,
like, we can't go there.
I hope that didn't.
Oh no, not at all.
But like I know people have gotten shot down and killed by SA2s, but in 2001, it's if what it is mass, right? They put so many up.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
mano. I'm like, dude, you can shoot all the SA2s you want at me. In a Viper, I feel very uncomfortable. It's the one that I'm not reacting to. It's the one that gets lucky that could still get me. But the SA2, now, again, this is all hindsight, and I sound very cavalier about it. Don't get me wrong. Like, there was some pants soilage that was happening in the moment where, where you're like, holy cow, man, these are a lot of SAMs that are coming my direction.
And absolutely, because I don't think you sound cavalier about it at all. It's the true evolution of seed. It's like, hey, the threat hadn't necessarily in that country evolved to you yet, but the road that the weasels of Vietnam paved against these threat systems led to the fact that you're now flying a Viper with HTS pod with a harm that can find shit itself, and then go and take and have the tactics that you went, and like you didn't come up with those necessarily. But but then as it kind of came through. So, and then now, like when you guys were doing some of that stuff, was you guys, as you guys are shooting at TTRs and things like that, did you guys also target EW, height finder, like all kinds of stuff? What holistic seed were you guys doing too?
So one of the 4 reactive shots that I was telling you about, one of them was against a flat face, right? And so it was Zot's 4-ship. I wasn't as a part of this 4-ship, and I think I might have been flying that night, but I don't remember. But they had basically were RTBing and had just left the seed cap, and Bodie Pules, who you might remember from Luke, brand new, and he was one of the super sharp wingmen. I think Bodie was maybe 6 months out of MQT by the time he shot his first harm. And we took Bodie and another young wingman, lieutenants, over more experienced wingmen, I think, just because they showed up and they were just shit hot, right? And I'm pretty sure this was Bodie, where he's on Zot's wing and he's looking in his HAZ and he sees the FF and he's like, sniff flat face, and like they're done with their mission, and Zot's like, shoot it, Magnum. Right? They're like, why are we going to overfly? Like, it's one thing to not want to shoot the flat face because you need the harms because you're supporting the strike package. Where you're done, you're on the way out, and this flat face popped up, and he's like, yeah, man, slap shot, let it rip. And
you're just saving gas at that point.
Yep, and that was one of the 4 reactive shots. And and like you were talking about what changed, right? So where I felt like the AOC, and again, I say this very flippantly, I'm not saying they did this, but like it was like, holy shit, so we trained to a 4-ship of weasels with harms doing the thing, right? JDAM, the weapon that killed the fighter pilot, was we had just gotten it, and I think it had just been developed and fielded in the CAF within a year, I want to say, prior to the war. So GBU 31s, right? The original crowd pleaser, GBU 31 2,000 pounder. So we knew how to use it. We trained to it. It was, you're going to laugh at this. The two modes we had of deploying it was bomb. I don't even remember what we called it, but dropping it on coordinates or doing a Viz JDAM where you rolled in with a dive toss container, put the thing in the thing, let it rip in the basket, and that was it, right? Because we didn't have target.
Still had to train to that in 2014.
We hadn't started talking about TLE and shit like that yet. And then the other cool thing we had just gotten was CBU 103, right? So it was basically your CBU 87, except it had an INS. So it wasn't GPS guided, but you didn't have to do a CCIP delivery out of a pop. It was this. So that was so I carried, for my first 2 missions in OIF, I carried harm, 2 by harm, came back Arizona both nights. And then, like you'd show up to the step desk and find out so all of a sudden I showed up to the step desk and it was like, you're carrying CB 103 today. And so it was like, they went from the first, call it 2 or 3 nights, all weasels are carrying harm. Then it became, okay, element leads are carrying some kind of weapon that's not harm, and wingmen are carrying harm. And then it became 1's carrying one thing, 3's carrying something else, and the wingmen are carrying harm. And it eventually went to an evolution where your 4-ship, each person was carrying a different weapon. Like there's a JDAM in there, there's a WICMID in there, there's a harm in there, there's a Maverick in there, right? And so
there you go.
It became like, we never trained to doing seed, and deed was kind of a thing that we talked about. And then, like somewhere in that evolution, it was like no more 4-ships. It was like, it was a roving 2 ships. So, you'd have a 2-ship where number 1's carrying Maverick, number 2's carrying JDAM, and then the next 2-ship, broken up 4-ship, where number 1's carrying WICMID and number 2's carrying harm, right? So, and then it became like roving motorcycle gangs. You just took your 2-ship wherever and you figured it out. And there was a lot of on the fly making things happen, because we didn't really, 2-ship seed was something you did in training when you didn't have a 4-ship and you just practiced the basics, but that became the employing element. And we called it the seed roving motorcycle gang. You would just take your 2-ship and you just range around Iraq and kind of look for work. And I did a lot of that. I would write down frequencies for JTACs and ASOCs and stuff. So I would, if the KAOC didn't have anything for me or something like that, I'd start kind of horn myself out to various ASOCs and be like, what do you got? And I got to employ a lot of ordnance, because I went out and kind of sought taskings. I got a little bit of trouble for it because of the politics of, they're like the guidance and appropriation, the GAT, I guess, where like the CFAC has X number of weapons and the ground component commander gets X number and things like that. And they're like, you can't cross the streams. I'm like, dude, I'm getting the job done. They're like, no, those bombs are appropriated for the CFAC, and you did it you ended up employing them in CAS. And I'm like, dude, I was on hour 4 of a 5-hour vol with no tasking. So I found a tasking and did it. But it was the issue was because it went to the wrong component commander. And I was like, my God, come on, let's stop this silliness.
No. Yeah. Well, I mean,
when I say I got in trouble, it got mentioned. I did not really get in trouble. They're like, hey, there were some people at KAOC that had panties and wads over it, but I didn't get in trouble over it.
And that's the thing is like and from the sounds of it is when the overall conversation or the overall objective was mission effectiveness, it seemed like that was everybody that you cared about seemed to have the same kind of mentality. So, and there you go. And that's the one too is I think Desert Storm from what I've gotten to talk to the guys is Desert Storm went about as expected. It like 38 days, 38 days of an air war followed by a ground invasion. The ground invasion didn't go as expected. They expected to get a little bit heavier resistance there.
Right.
But then with you guys, kind of one, it was expected that the 38-day Desert Storm would probably happen in about a week.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, and the fact that you guys had like Tomahawk and Calcum and all kinds of stuff to
Right,
be able
right.
to soften that one up. And that's awesome. And then the other thing that was interesting, you're talking about kind of whoring yourself out to JTAX, is the difference between the two. Did you guys have any seed issues? Because again, it was 38-day air war, Desert Storm, followed by the ground invasion. But we did it a little bit differently this time, where on the 21st, we moved the Marines, like
Right.
first MEF
Right.
into there. So were you guys aware, like were there boots on the ground, like in Baghdad when you're trying to do seed?
I imagine there's probably, tier one guys all over the place, but
Oh yeah.
that is not, so we, and again, and I'm not intending to poke anyone in the eye. So my previous weapons officer, Francis Ekman, he's still around. He was the wing weapons officer at PSAB. So before we flew, like he would give us kind of like, here's the situation. And dude, it was great. Like he would give us the ground order of battle, the Army's on phase line this. So when we stepped, we had really high SA. All right. And then there was weasels at another base that we later found out that maybe we're not getting that level of SA. And I think that was one of the things that resulted in a harm fratricide, right? And again, this is not intended as a spear at anyone. It's, shit happens. But one of the things they found out when they investigated that one was like, hey man, the dudes that shot that harm did not really know that at the time that the Army had moved that far north and they would expect a Patriot. So they ended up shooting a Patriot because, as you know, it's ambiguous with red threats and hat shot, all that stuff, right?
Which happened in Desert Storm too.
Right. And so they ended up shooting a Patriot. And nobody got hurt. The ironic thing about that, sorry, I've got dogs in the background.
You're all good.
But the ironic thing was, there's a number in 3-1 that talks about like a harm shot will render this thing inoperative for X number of hours or whatever. And ironically, I don't know if this is true fact, but I heard this from multiple sources. They had the Patriot up and running in that amount of time, almost like to the thing. Like, oh shit, the number's right.
It works.
And so yeah, we had from PSAB, I felt like we had very good SA, right? And then Psycho Carter, he was our lieutenant intel. I'll give him a shout out, dude. He came up with this theater collection compilation thing where every 6 hours they would print us a new map of where every component of their IADS was, right? And so I remember in my jet about to crank up and Psycho coming running up and waving like, hold on, don't start. And he'd climb up the ladder and hand you because a fresh map had just come out. And he's like, man, I can get this to them before they take off.
That's awesome.
So,
That's awesome.
And, it was an eye chart of a map. It had, the threat rings everywhere and little lines on the edge that gave you coordinates of where they thought each one of these things was. So we, in addition to Army phase lines and where the Army was and where we can expect Patriots and stuff like that. So I felt like out of PSAB, we took off with a high level of SA, and I don't feel like, or I shouldn't say I don't feel like, I don't know, but I got the impression that may not have been consistent throughout the bases.
Yeah, and that's absolutely critical.
Hey,
we talked.
Quick, Flash. Can we pause this real quick? Let me go take care of those dogs, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. I'll be right back. right, bro.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No
Thanks. All
worries.
right. I
No,
actually took the
no.
opportunity to bows too. I was like, yeah, I'll blame it on the dogs, but I'll call it a piss break.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. No, that's totally good. Cool. All right. No, we have Rain edit that part out.
Okay,
With
perfect.
that, it's all good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So as we're kind of getting towards the end of the discussion, kind of like from looking back on the career, your experience, I've kind of tongue in cheek, but been asking everybody, and I don't tell anyone that I'm going to ask this question, but seeing what the variance of or similarities of response that I get from all the people that I'm talking to. And again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and talk. But in your opinion, Vandal, what is like either knowing the threat, knowing the jet, or just pure tactics, or just something that you guys did? What is the best way to kill a Sam?
Man, um, that's a tough one. The best, well, the best
If you
way to
had to
kill a
do
Sam,
it with a gun to your head.
yeah, the best way to kill a Sam, number one, tried and true, is to not get killed by it first. Right? That's the best way to kill a Sam. So me and Diver, like we ended up getting the squadron's first confirmed SAM kill, if you will, in the history of the 14th. That at least that's what the OPR bullet says, and we killed it with CBU. It was a low blow SA3 co-located with an SA6, and we took it out with CBU, which I certainly think the only thing more manly than a CBU to kill a SAM would be the gun, right? so yeah. So and it was anyway. The mission was interesting in its own right, but so I'll tell you the best way is that, right. In now, what I used to tell the B coursers was like your life is an onion, right, and that the core of the onion is your airplane, right. So knowing your airplane is what it is, right? So it's that little tight, call it the core of the planet, if you will, and that is knowing that's your dash one, right? Dash one, dash 34, knowing everything about your airplane, inside, outside, everything, right? Then the next layer on the outside is the rules of employing your airplane, right? That's your 11.2 F-16, 11.202, whatever, right? And that should be a thin layer. So, and then the third layer on the outside is killing, right? That's your tactics, right? And that by virtue of geometry, that is the most surface area. That is where you should live, right? That is where you live, is in that outer core of planet, onion, whatever you want to call, pick your metaphor. But if that core isn't strong and implodes, the entire thing collapses on itself, right? So it comes to, like, your daily life is, you should always be living in that layer where you're refining tactics, and you're trying to get better at surviving, trying to get better at killing. But if you ignore the other stuff, then it doesn't work, right? And so I don't think, I don't know many great tacticians, great fighter pilots that, also, I mean, again, I don't mean like instrument school instructors kind of thing, but I mean, like you got to know your airplane, right? You got to know your airplane. You got to know how to employ it. And I don't know many folks that were incredible at employing the aircraft tactically, yet really not good at the admin in the aircraft, right? So, I would tell you, if I could distill it into, not a weapon, not a tactic, it's got to be wanting. The number one way to kill a SAM is want to kill it, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, you can go all the way back to, it's wanting to kill it has got to go back to closing the briefing door at the no later than the hack starting on time. It can go back to all ancient traditions that I guess we had, that I feel like we're losing, at least from what I see to a certain extent, is sitting in flight order, not talking out of turn in the brief, stepping on time. Everybody cranks motors at the engine start time, sounding good on the radio, mimicking flight lead as you taxi to the right. getting an EOR, lining up helmets, right? These are all, I sound like an old guy with a gray beard ranting about shaking my fist at the good old days. But all those things were part of our tribal culture, right? And they all had a purpose, right? Well, it was about looking good and sounding good, but the looking good and sounding good was not for the sake of looking good and sounding good. That set almost at a subconscious level, it permeated everything you did, right? So when we went to Red Flag, like, it's one of those things that kills me is I see like, a four ship and there's two guys sitting in this row and two guys sitting in this row. And, I got it, package lead set up for whatever. But it was a known, like you just walked in and one walked in and behind it was 2, 3, 4, and you filed in and you kept flight integrity from the time that you went to the flight brief. And then that flight integrity did not end. Flight discipline, flight integrity did not end until the debrief door was open. And often that flight integrity almost carried into the bar afterwards, right?
Definitely does, or should.
Yeah. And it was that way of doing things. And so, yeah, you don't kill a SAM by lining up helmets, but you sure inculcate a culture and an attention to detail and just a give a shit factor that is absolutely necessary to translate into killing the SAM, as you asked.
Absolutely.
Right? And again,
absolutely,
it might be too much of a stretch for some folks to equate the two, but it was just a way that you carried yourself. And it goes back to kind of the discussion we had before about an entitlement mentality and things like that. And I don't think that's fighter pilot specific. It's just, fighter pilots come from where? They come from society, right? And so society's changed in many ways. And, we used to, I was kind of a mid-level junior captain when the whole SNAP thing came out, right? Sensitive New Age pilots, right?
That's right.
First, and again, no insult intended, but different generations, cohorts.
You've called my generation one. You've called me that.
Right? And it was the first time. It was the first time. It was a weird thing where I was like the first time I felt like feelings were brought into a fighter squadron. I'm like, what? Does not compute. I don't understand. And again, that's not to say that one generation is better than the other, but it was just as society evolves, well, because you're bringing in people from that society, it's inevitable. And, it was a term of endearment. And Maestro O'Malley, who was in my weapons school class, he made that first, legendary snap video, watching guys, two wingmen walking through the parking lot. One of them sees a flower and he's like, smells it on the way to brief. He's like, oh, it's so pretty. And it was like, snap, he made it like a Top Gun intro. So that was a great, and it was something but it was also, yes, it was a pejorative. Yes, it was a term of endearment, but being able to talk about it also kept some guys in check because nobody wanted to be called a snap.
No one wanted to be that guy.
Right. And so it was like within your own society, a corrective function. And that progression has continued. One of the things I find is, and again, I am not claiming to be right on this. I'm just giving you my opinion, right? So the Air Force has gone headlong into this things about balance, right? Balance of life, right? And dude, I'm sorry, we're not office workers. When I say fighter pilots, like we don't have an 8 to 4, 9 to 5 job. There is no balance per se, because and I told this story. I was speaking at a B course graduation. I was telling some folks, like, man, it was about, I don't know, a year into being a weapons officer where I finally just said, I'm like, you know what? I am not going to work 6 hours or 6 days a week, right? Because no matter how many times I come in on Sunday and give myself a 1-day weekend, and this is, by the way, we did it at Misawa before I went to weapons school, so it wasn't a weapons officer specific thing. We were flying so much that you had to come in on the weekends to catch up on QUEEP. Now a first world problem, I guess. And so, and here my wife is like, my God, we're living in Europe and like, we can't even do anything. Cause like, you have, Friday nights, the O Club, and we have a great time of Friday night. We recover about halfway through Saturday and maybe go out to eat Saturday, and Sunday, boom, you're right back to work. And so I just stopped doing that. But how do you balance a desire to live with like your domestic day-to-day life, right? Because that's what it is. You can't fit in an 8-hour workday or a 10-hour workday and pick an hour, this quest for excellence in this life and death thing we do called combat aviation.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what's your balance, right? And so, after I retired, I asked my wife, I'm like, man, you put up with a lot of shit, like long hours. As a weapons officer, it was like I was the one opening the vault and I was the one locking it up at the end, unless I had crew rest or something like that. And I wasn't unique in that. People were in the vault studying. It was like that was just what you did. And so how do you fit that into some kind of balance? And I was like, why'd you put up with that, right? And she said something that was like super, like it stayed with me. Now she's like, well, I just, with what you did, if you were spending that time getting better at what you were doing, that's good. It made me feel better that you didn't suck at your job, because it meant that much more likelihood that you weren't going to kill yourself or get killed in war.
Yeah.
And I was like, mind blown. Like, that's my wife telling me that, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like the Air Force has pushed this balance thing to such an extreme that, it's kind of like, hey, what is your spouse going to appreciate more? You being home 45 minutes early every day and cutting that debrief short, or 2 or 3 4 years down the road when you're called upon to do the thing, you actually come home and all the dinners that you've had and all the time that you spent seeking balance and peacetime will mean nothing if you didn't pursue that excellence of that, just that workmanship, just grind it out, whether it's the vault, whether it's the sim, whether it's, it's watching game film, whatever. And so all of it becomes worthless. And it's kind of crept in, because it goes into what you were saying is, it's been a long time. All those folks that have been shot at major theater war aren't around. So everybody is kind of training to what they think it's going to be like, and what we think, and things like that. And really the biggest thing I would say is, when it comes to killing SAMs, going back to, that question is, it's not a tactic that's going to kill a SAM. It's the ability to think your way and solve the problem real time, right? That is what's going to kill a SAM. Tactics are like bell bottoms, dude. They go in and out of style and they come back. We went to Desert Storm as a low altitude Air Force, and people got shut down, and they're like, hey, we're going to become medium altitude. Then we went medium. Then we were like, okay, we got to go back low. And so now we're doing hoverboards and, whatever. And so tactics are like bell bottoms. But if I have one critique of, my descendants in the fighter business, is they have wedded themselves to exquisite tactics. And I feel like there's a bit of missing the forest for the trees, which is, dude, a tactic is a transient thing, right? A tactic, a weapon, whatever, it's a transient thing.
Yep.
The thing that is timeless is the ability to think on the fly, make decisions off of imperfect information, right? And that's another beef that I have right now, is everybody assumes you're going to have this perfect information, perfect intel, perfect this and that. And so one of the things I've started, when I go to red flags, is I was like, I need White Force intel. I tell them, I was like, I need you guys to start pumping ambiguous and erroneous intel, right? Because that's what it is. And I'm like, and again, ooh. I love my, and I don't mean like just bad, right? But I mean like,
no.
It's not like we expect 6 flankers on this wave and we expect, 4 on this one. And I'm like, have them brief. They expect these guys on 25-minute strip alert and have them be wrong, right? But I was like, we've got to stop faulting intel for our failures, because that's not warfare, right? We've deviated so much from the principles of warfare, whether it be mass, offensive surprise, all that stuff, or getting good at performing effectively in ambiguous situations, right? And that's where our 2-ship motorcycle gang, I learned. I was like, dude, we'd done repped out so much that we didn't really train to 2-ship seat in 3-1. And there was a lot of times you'd be in the AO and some stink bug would call you up and like, hey, Viper, I've got this TOT, I'm heading over here and this and that. And you're like, got it. or a B-52, right? And so you were doing this pickup game of building a strike package on the fly, notionally, right? Of 7, 8, 10 airplanes, and then like putting the pieces together, listening to what's going on out there, and like, okay, this is where I need to be to support, Stick Bug 1-1. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to come off target. When he calls weapons away, I'm going to come off target left. And I remember one time, like I started coming off target left. I'm like, oh crap, I can't do that because there's a B-52 over here dropping through my block. And I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
So I got to come back, and I'm just watching, these bombs walk all over Baghdad. So it was that ability to think your way through a problem. And I'm not saying we were, the end all be all for it,
Yeah.
but that adherence to, you have to have tactics, right? But tactics are there as they're the skeleton, but you've
Starting
got to
place.
build flesh and sinew around that. That is all this. This is the most lethal weapon that we have. And if we blunt this thing and make the book the most lethal thing we have, again, I want to make clear that I'm not advocating for going wild dingo and throwing 3-1 away. Right? That is not what I'm advocating for.
Nope.
But what I'm saying is that we have become so formulaic with our tactics and made them so complex, and like the dance of the sugar plum fairies, all these consecutive miracles. And the one thing that you will learn if you go to a major theater war is all these things you trained to, all these assets you thought were going to support you in this and that, all of a sudden they get higher level taskings and you're on your own. You got to figure it out. And, our example was RJs. We always trained a Viper 99 being on frequency, color this, tag this. Dude, it wasn't until the last like 4 or 5 days of the air war that an RJ even answered any of our calls, because they all had higher level taskings, right? And so there are, and again, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but the one thing I can guarantee is on night one, it will not be what you expected, and it will deviate from what your expectations and what Intel is saying. And that's been that way. It's the classic thing. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. No tactic will survive intact first contact. Because think about what programs country X has that we don't know about, right?
Yeah.
That they're going to dust off on night one, or what technology we've misassessed, right? And so we build these exquisite solutions to a problem that we think we've quantified, never accounting for the fact that we might be wrong.
And almost the fear of being wrong, like weds us to that same thing, that we have to have the tactic. If
That's right.
This is it. And if this tactic is wrong, I don't know what to do. And
Yeah,
that's the thing. Because just like you said, it's like, no, we're not like your take on what's the best way to kill a Sam. It's like the 1 square foot of real estate between the ears is. Yep. What you actually said is, I need to know the tactics so well that I know when to deviate from them. And I need to know the tactics so well that I know which ones to piece together, a part of that tactic with a part of this tactic with a part of that tactic, so that now I know my jet, I know my tactics, I know the threat so well that I can dynamically think on the fly with this ambiguous information, lack of information, no information.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll take that. And by the way, dude, cut it off anytime based on time if you need to. But
we'll keep. I love the discussion. I was just like, I hope the listeners have time useful consciousness. I love this. I think it's great. Like, let's keep going. We'll ask the last question here in a second.
I'll give you my 4th gen kind of version, because again. Never having flown the F-35, very familiar and whatnot. But, I'll give you examples of where I feel like, we really need to maybe vector check. And I think there's examples like this that you'll probably think of in the F-35, right? So one is modified more, and the other one is the way we were doing TI for quite a while on the Viper. So without getting into the numbers, right? Modified more about, 2-3-1s ago, it came out. And so what you do is you have on your lineup card, you have this matrix, or in your, your WES card of like, at this range, it's this, at this range, it's this, at this range, it's this.
Fences.
And so I'm asking the weapons officer, I'm like, well, what's the rule of thumb? How do you apply this? Like, no. You go cold and you look down and you see how far back behind you the threat is. I'm like, wait. So we're basing this. So I have to look at my knee to figure out what my action range is. And again, scientifically correct. Everything is right. I'm like, this is garbage. Not in the sense that it's wrong, but it's like we have gone too long without having had to dealt with the temporal distortion in the emotional response, your fight or flight response, or whatever, all those physiological, neurological things that happen in real life combat, to where we've said, yes, this matrix is, we're going to fly with this thing and we're going to look down in the middle of this air battle and figure out what are,
Nope.
and I'm like, dude,
Sure
first of all, how do you know that thing is back? Is it your link track latency? Is it your AWACS call? Is it that? So the first place it falls apart is how accurate is the information you're getting, right? So rather than getting really good at executing the best that you can based off of uncertainty and ambiguity, we have scienced the shit out of this, and the assumptions aren't even valid, right? The assumptions are not valid. So we're like doing this, we're doing the classic where instead of cutting with an axe and measuring with a micrometer, we're trying to execute with a micrometer. I'm like, that's not applicable in a real life shooting war, right? So the other one is, on that same vein, is, so I went away, I retired in 2014, and then I kind of got back into the tactical world in 2020 and started teaching the Sims. And I felt like Rip Van Winkle, where I'd been in this sleep, and I'd come back in and I'm like, hey, what have you guys done to the place? And in my observation on the air-to-air side, is I was telling the guys where I was, I'm like, look, here's my honest assessment. And it's a 6-year gap. I just closed my eyes and I'm coming back into this 3-1 and watching what you guys. I'm like, what I'll tell you is the average flight lead today, when I was having this conversation in 2020, the average young flight lead is better at TI and understands TI better than I did as an IP, right? However, the average IP is way worse at DCA than I was as a flight lead, right? And the reason is we have scienced the hell out of TI, right? We were doing this thing where we would flow cold, and there's like 12 bogey dope calls where you're going to get exact bearing and range to every threat behind you from every fighter in the foreship. And then, you're like, oh yeah, this is TI. You got unlimited back pedal range, right? So you just keep flowing cold for 50 miles
till the map runs out in the sim
until you have like to the 10th of a mile exact position of everything, and then you execute, and you're graded on executing the game plan. Like, did you make the right decision? And then you go fly DCA the next day or in your upgrade or whatever, and you get housed because you don't have time to have unlimited back pedal range and all that kind of stuff, right? So It's like, this is really fucked up, because TI, and like, well, no, dude, we're doing TI is supposed to be to teach the pure 3-1 and this assumptions. I'm like, okay, but what's actually happening, just one old guy's rantings, is that you're setting bad habits in TI that are translating into mission failure in DCA. There's a disconnect here, right?
Yep.
And the fundamental philosophical problem is you are trying to train to execute air-to-air in a vacuum, admittedly, with perfect information. And so you are setting the expectation of having information you will never have. You will be getting comm jammed. You have got to train in TI to making like, okay, dude, you got 15 seconds, pick a number, 15 seconds cold, get the best picture you can, pitch in, and then we'll debrief to what the input error was, output error, perception error, whatever the hell that is. But let's train to that thing versus doing this formulaic, I will have exact trigonometry of everything. That doesn't happen. You're training guys to a unexecutable, unrealistic environment, which is not what warfare is. And you got to deal with ambiguity and make your best gut feel judgment, things like that, all based on tactics, all the things you said before. But those, and I'm sure there's tons of parallels like that in other communities, but those were things that I saw, and I'm like, you guys are doing really good at training to this thing, that is not as applicable to a shooting war as you think it is, because you're going to get punched in the nose. And you're going to have to figure shit out.
Yeah, and then that's the I it's almost like you read my mind on the last question. It's just like, what is the spirit and culture of being a weasel? Like that's what we've been talking about for the last about 15, 20 minutes. It's like, is you just want, because this is why we're having this conversation, and you were a part of the last, like what we consider the true shooting war, of like an enemy that wanted, like the war in Afghanistan, the enemy we were fighting wanted to kill the humans on the ground. Like they wanted to
Right.
kill the humans on the ground, and we were there in the air to protect the humans on the ground. And that was the way it was. It was just like, but they were not necessarily capable of killing the things in the air. And we had air
Sure.
dominance and just air supremacy. That doesn't necessarily exist in certain parts of the world, and it hasn't always existed because you were a part of it. And the fact of the matter is, we are losing that portion of it because zero, like in my, at least I think so, I'm pretty sure, yup, like I know I've been shot in the general direction of with heavy machine guns and small arms. It's like, but zero humans that I fly with that wear weasel patches right now have been shot at. And it's like, and it shows. And so that's why we're having these conversations, because you can't train like that, because you definitely cannot fight combat like that. And it's hard to convey that to people when you're not the guy who's been there. And that's the rub that you get into. And like which is why generally I become the perspective guy in the squadron, is I equate a lot of seed to my time in cast fighter in a cast in a cat. Welcome to getting old. But like I equate my seed briefs and discussions. I'm just like, hey, you're going to have about the same information I had when I was supporting the Afghanistan National Security Forces and the Afghanistan National Army with the JTAC that was back at Al Udeid. I was like, so I'm like, I had the same amount of SA that I think you're going to have here in this seed fight. Figure it out. And so to get towards the end, again, I could sit and talk Weaseling all day, but like if you could sum up from what you've read, learned, talked to, been a part of, all that, like what is the culture and spirit of being a weasel that you, as somebody who's hacked the mish and done it and it's a part of you, what do you convey as like the culture of being a weasel?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I would, and I believe it or not, I think I have a succinct answer to this one. I think the culture and the spirit of being a weasel is assuming all the risk to keep from your protected entity from having to assume it, right? And I don't mean all the risk, but in essence, it is accepting greater risk, right? It's a very selfless mission, right? It's in the sense, it's your job is not the mish. Now you can start getting into rollback IADS, deed, and destructive seed and stuff like that. I get it, but as a true weasel, just pure weasel, your job is to accept greater risk so that the folks that you're supporting assume lesser risk, right? And part of it is the cultural side of it is, I grew up in a world, the old saying in the fighter squadron is better to ask forgiveness than permission. And I feel like that has almost evolved into that's dead. And now it's like ask permission. And when you get permission, ask a second and third time, are you sure? Right. And it's this, I don't know if this is the right word. It's like the death of the swashbuckler, right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing, like knife in the teeth. And the night that we killed the SA3, perfect example of it, right? We trained to, hey, if we're going to operate above a cloud deck, we're going to have at least 10,000 feet above the cloud deck, so you can see the SAM coming through. And we're never going to do, under a cloud deck doing seed and all this kind of stuff, right? These are all, and then you have TRs and all these things. And I was number 3 that night. We push out. And I don't know if you remember when all the storms and everything happened early in the war, the sandstorms and things
Yep.
like that. Weather went dog
Yep.
shit. This would have been like 3 or 4 of the war. And we're up at like 350 with our wingman carrying harms, me and diver carrying CBU, big barn doors on our, and we're just like freaking wallowing at 350. And the minute you put 1.1 G on the jet, it starts buffeting. And he's like, "Hey man, go take 4 down below and see where the clear airspace is." And so, like he stays high. And this is as we're getting our seed cap, we're supporting a strike package off one of the carriers in the Gulf. And so we set deconfliction headings and stuff, and we're like, you do all that shit. And, you're IMC. You're like, yeah, of course, because there was nothing else to do. So we go descend below, and I get below, and I tell him, I'm like, "Hey man, you're not gonna like. I found clear airspace, but you're not gonna like where I found it." He's like, "Oh," I'm like, "Dude, we're down at 14,000 feet, and under overcast, right? Which even at night, that's not a good place you want to be." Right. And so what are you going to do? Right. And so what do you end up doing? You end up doing the thing that you said in training, I would never do that in combat. And so you do that because that's it.
You have
right.
to.
And and so he's like, "All right, I'll be right down." And so he gets down below, and the ceilings were kind of anywhere from 16 to 20 that varied. So we're kind of hanging out in the original seed block, right? We used to call it the shoot me, fuck me block, the 15 to 19. That's where we're doing seed over Baghdad. And that was the place I was telling you about. Like it was more a religious experience than a sortie, because like the seed cap is disintegrated. Like wingmen are basically wedge my ass. They're just hanging out, at your dead six because you're moving so much. We're just barely trying to get our, hot and cold synced up. There's no semblance of a cap, just shucking and jiving. And segue to my Navy brethren, we're down there just getting housed. And I'm like, there's no way all 4 of us are coming back today. It's impossible. And we've been down there for a while. And I'm like, 1, 3, like, what's going on with the strikers? And so he reaches out to the strike lead, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're feet wet." They've been gone for like 10 minutes. And we're like, "You sons of
Miller time.
Like,
Miller time is the thing.
Yeah. We can't leave because the strikers will be unprotected. And they just forgot to tell us. They're like, "Yeah, we out, man."
I was going to say, it was like, they tell me that combat's going to be like red flag. They tell me. And it was just like, that is something that is like red flag.
Yeah. And so the thing is, that entire sortie, we did stuff that we like stood on top of desks saying we would never do this in combat. It's too risky. It's blah, 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 this, that. And then, we went to the tanker, each wingman had 1 harm left. We get tasked to go take out a low blow that was right back where we had just been. So that's a whole other story, but the ethos is the ability and the willingness, and it takes leadership having your back, right? So I don't want to exclude leadership in that, not make this a total captain problem, but it's that ethos of, dude, there's no other way to put it. Like, we're in a life and death business, right? Or I used to be in a life and death business. You still are. And we're trying to kill people who are trying to kill us. And there's no way to sugarcoat the essence of warfare. And as a weasel, you have to be the guy or gal that is willing to take that risk and put your life on the line for the folks that to reduce your protected entity's risk level. And that
Absolutely.
takes training, thinking outside of the box, and aggression.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. And yeah, I agree. It's a good point to end on. Like that's kind of it. Like we talked about at the very beginning, you don't necessarily know, and I've gotten the opportunity to fly the hog, and that's a part, but being a weasel is very, very similar to what I saw about being a hog driver, about it actually truly becomes a part of you. And it's just in what the history, the culture, the people that have done it before you, like yourself. And I said it in the intro to this series, which I love this. This is an honor to do, is like, it's the heroes that, like, I consider you a hero, like a weasel hero, because you guys have done it. You guys have done it. Like, you guys have done it. And that's the thing you have to consider, like, when you continue to go on. and that warfare will change, tactics will change, technology will change, but the spirit and the things that you just talked about, they just fucking don't, and they don't change. And it's the person in the arena that is getting the job done and focusing on mission effectiveness versus what it looks like and being right and or anything like that. So thank you, Vandal, for your time. I'll give you the last word here in a minute. But to all of our listeners and supporters, thank you again so much. I'll sign this off like I've signed off every other series. Is the reason we are here is to talk and tell the stories of weasels, and then also acknowledge at the end that not all weasels made a home. And so the fact is I wear that on my sleeve, my weasel patch and my weapon school patch. And a squadron commander a long time ago told me to always remember who wore those patches before you. It's the only reason you get to wear it. So to the weasels that have gone before us, those that didn't make it home, this is why we're having these discussions to tell these stories. And Vandal, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. And I hope that the listeners enjoyed it because I sure as hell did. So over to you for last words.
Okay. Only thing I'll say is one, I'd like to push back on the hero thing. I appreciate it, but that's not what we were. It's just, any of us, right? So uh, I don't cotton to that word very well. So again,
Yeah,
I'll just push back that I do not consider myself a hero in any way, shape, or form.
that's okay.
And then the last thing I'd say is, and this is not a weasel specific thing. I think it is a fighter pilot specific thing to a certain extent. Is it doesn't matter what your mission is. I think I personally believe, and it's just my opinion, that if being a fighter pilot is not a way of life, I don't think you're doing it right, right? And it's all encompassing, because in the end, if it is not that all, I mean, if it is not all encompassing, you are not going to be at that place where when the nation calls on you to do the thing, um, you may not be as ready as you could have been if it didn't consume you. It's a passion. It's a way of life. It ain't a job.
All right. Amen. Amen. That's it. Well, again, thank you guys so much, or thank you, Vandal, so much. I appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed part 4 of the evolution of seeds. Stand by for part 5, where we're going to talk about current and future fight. And again, it's going to be in theory, but it's going to be informed by the stories that we've been hearing throughout this entire series. And Vandal, have a great one. And everybody else out there, thanks for listening.